About 10 years ago, I was working on the refurb of a nationwide house and down near Swindon. And we wanted to clean the building, so I did the fateful thing and put into Google water and cleaning. And one of the links, after I'd found what I wanted, was Victor Schauberger, and on it was this disc-shaped object, which is called a repulsion. And that was, but as I said, it was about 10 years ago. So I'm going to talk to you about particularly Victor Schauberger, and how he developed various kinds of technology. To my mind, Victor is to water what Tesla is to electricity. And not a lot of people know about him, or this, you can call it technology, I suppose, but all of our technology that we have now is all on the hot end of a stick. There's always two ends to a stick, so we've been using the hot end to generate all our power. Internal combustion engines, external combustion engines, hot nuclear, everything is hot. And I kind of associate it with the Piscean masculine age. And we're going into the Aquarian age, which are these energies. It's called implosion because, well, I suppose in physics, it depends how you look at how things move. So the masculine energies move from the inside out, the axis to the radius. And those energies are what nature uses to take things apart. But the feminine energies are centripetal. They go from the outside in, so it's radial axial acceleration of fluids. It's just one of the ways of looking at it. But on here, I'm using an illustration which is, well, by the way, a lot of this information does come from a series of 4 books that were translated from German. Well, he was Austrian, called the Eco-Technology series, and they were translated by Callum Coates many years ago. There's a series of 4. But so this is a story that actually comes from Victor, because he talked about this. This, as you can see, is obviously a sycamore seed. All these other shapes are man-made interpretations of that same shape. And what this is designed to do when it falls off the tree is actually slow down, because it wants to break its fall, B-R-A-K-E, slow it down. That's what it's designed to do, that shape, is to slow things down. I'm really drumming this in so you can see where it's going in a minute. So you kind of get it, yeah, you got it, good. Right, so that's the shape you're going to use to slow things down. Now, all these other shapes are designed to do what? Make things go faster. Thank you very much, you're dead on. So we've got different shapes, or different designs on the same principle, but you're using a braking shape to accelerate a flow. So they're the wrong shapes. We're using the wrong shapes to do what we need to do, which is move a fluid. When you do use these shapes, I don't know if you know anything about propellers or impellers, but they get problems at the tips. They get cavitation and prop slip and all kinds of strange things happening on the edge of the blade. And basically, the engineers then, they do all kinds of things to avoid that, like different shape. They get very clever. They're trying to engineer out a design fault, which they'll never do. So we know they're using the wrong shapes. They get quite clever. But you get a problem also at the end of this. I think I mentioned that cavitation. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of cavitation. Yeah? Because it is a way to free energy eventually. Fleischmann and Pons were doing this in the late 90s with water, bombarding water. It was collapsing a bubble, making temperatures, they said, equivalent to the surface of the sun. And was it possible to sustain it? And then it was kind of all hidden. I mean, some of this talk, as I go along, I'll talk about what I think happened or is happening in regard of technology. Because when you give this talk, people say, well, where do we get one? Where do we get an implosion turbine? And there's none on the shelf anywhere, as far as I know. So we'll touch on that in a little while. But there's lots of diagrams. Victor was a great draftsman. He was absolutely phenomenal because, he could see it in his mind, so he had to express it in pencil. Didn't have a computer, of course. So he used to draw it in his head. We'll come on to the shapes later. This actually is a picture of what I was just describing. Centrifugal, centripetal on one side and the opposite on the other. So on this side, you've got disintegrating, decelerating, can't read that one, destructive, divergent, can't read that one, what's it say on there? Anyway, I can't read. There's a bunch of words on that describe this you might call outward motion that we're all using to drive our craft, friction reducing. But on the other side, you get the opposite. So on this side, with radial axial acceleration, you get accelerating, inwinding, contracting, convergent. But this is the magic one, friction reducing. So basically what that's saying is the faster you go, the less resistance, the less friction you get. So if you design on that side, you get this magic stuff we call free energy, for want of a better term. So what I say in here is there's like a glass ceiling. You've only been told about anything to do with this, the hot end. Because when you go on that side, there's no meters. Once you get this stuff, there's no meters. And now your power is decentralized. All this is about centralized power generation. And hot. Now, there's other points I make, which is there's Wilhelm Reich was talking about orgone energy. He was talking about deadly orgone and good orgone. I don't know if you've heard of Wilhelm Reich. You might have done, some of you. Well, it's definitely worth looking him up. The other reason why I mention that is our internal combustion engines produce, I think, deadly orgone. And that's not a good vibration because of the expansive energy. If you can do anything that contracts, then you'll change the energy system, and now you'll be in a good energy bubble. That's the way I think about it. Also, our power generation seems all off kilter at 52 cycles. That's not conducive to our health. So I kind of think it's by design, you know. And then we come in with a magic word of some sort of conspiracy. But in the middle, I was put a glass ceiling, if you want to call it, or glass wall. And we're told about the 3 laws of thermodynamics, which describe how things work. But I prefer the view that you would call them the theories of thermodynamics, which were developed 100 years ago for steam engines. And we're still allegedly using them. So these 3 laws are quite well known. So I wrote a 4th one, which was on the intro. And this is how it seems to work. The 4th law. Anybody want to hear the 4th law of thermodynamics? I'll abide. Anyway, it's simple enough. It just says, don't mess with the top 3 or you won't get your funding next year. And it seems to be a lot of it about, because anybody who's doing any research, it's all controlled, it seems to me, in universities. And a thing I've been quite careful to cultivate is so I don't have a reputation to lose. That means I'm free to think, do, fiddle about with stuff. I'm not going to publish in Nature, or I hope not anyway, maybe, you know, not interested. Because if you've got a reputation to lose or a position, you're hamstrung, because you're only ever going to produce information that keeps your research going, and that seems to come up a lot. They don't want to solve a problem, they want to keep doing the research because that's what they're funded to do. It goes across medicine, goes across energy, a whole bunch of stuff. That's the way I think about it. I mean, some of you might know the story of Tesla and Wardenclyffe, which was energy that could be transmitted anywhere on the planet. You could call it free energy, and he was sponsored by J.P. Morgan, and we still have Morgan and something. And when Morgan came to see our work, was this great big tower with a great big dome on the top and stuff going down into the ground, and it seems to work a bit like the pyramid, my view about it, and that is still an implosive effect, and he's accessing the capacitance field of the Earth and doing wonderful magical stuff. So he impresses J.P. Morgan, could screw a light bulb anywhere in the ground on a stick. So J.P. Morgan says, that's brilliant, son, after he told him roughly how it works. Where do we put the meters? So we don't have Wardenclyffe. I know I keep labouring this point, but it seems important. Well, because people say, well, if you've got free energy, surely we'd have it now. We're burning oil and coal. And then I just point out, well, if you had a business that was worth $4 to $5 trillion a year, I don't know what the dollar's doing now, but that was a lot of money, you know, when it was sort of stable. You'd want to protect your interests, so you'd do anything to protect that. So anything that's come along is either, well, one of the worst filtration systems, and the con is that you're going to make loads of money, is the patent system, because everybody wants to patent the idea, and so they can protect it to make a load of money. Don't blame them. But what happens is that's like a fine mesh that idea sticks on, and it's just centralized. You know, they could just check the patent applications and say, oh, that's a free energy device. We'll go and have a word with him or her. And allegedly, it's on, you know, I don't know what your view is of David Wilcock, but on his site and elsewhere, he talks about between 5,000 and 6,000 patents, which are locked up, which are really kind of our heritage, and they cover all of this stuff. They cover free energy devices, anti-gravity or inverse gravity, zero-point energy, whatever you want to call it, health-giving devices, all kinds of amazing stuff, cures for cancers going way back. Well, I mean, in my simple research, I know of dozens. I've never cured cancers, but there's a whole bunch of them. You know, anti-neoplastons, Brzezinski, and Run from the Cure, Rick Simpson, the oil of the hemp plant, which is being demonized, which is so healthful for us, and a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, there's obviously a conspiracy going on, I tell you. Anyway, in case you didn't know. Didn't you? What are you doing here, then? I kind of like language. I like playing with language. This is a magic word, because if you go out, well, maybe you shouldn't say grockles, but I call some people grockles are sort of locked into 3D land. And as soon as the word conspiracy comes up, it's like a magic shutdown button. It's emergency shutdown. If there's conspiracy, you press that and all in, stuff switches off. And I've done I've done several talks last year. And, you know, some people say, you haven't convinced me. And I just say, well, you're fine. I ain't bothered. I'm not interested in convincing you at all. You know, it's your own, what's in your own head. Anyway, get back on Showy. But in a way, there's a linear flow of time. That's why I'm beating around the bush, as it were. I'm just not talking all about Victor. I'm talking about his ideas. But you've got to look at some of this stuff, because otherwise, why isn't it here? So you've got to have some history. So anyway, I'll just talk a little bit about the energies and how they work. Victor was from Austria, and he spent most of his life in the high Austrian mountains. But he had a very particular knack. He was very interested in how nature worked. So if he was looking at water, he'd be studying it very closely. He'd be really looking at it. I can empathize with that, because I used to be a whitewater instructor in Norway. It was many years ago. But I used to study water very, very carefully, because if you didn't, you could end up in big difficulties. So there was a great incentive. And what you kind of do is you kind of look through his eyes when he's talking about certain things. He even talks, he'll say a strange thing like, you've got to think from the octave above. And you think, well, what does that mean? You know, what does it mean, thinking about you're humming your chakras when you're doing that? What happens? But he did have this facility. It was like, I don't know, he might have been on something. Maybe he was doing mushrooms, I don't know. But anyway, he had a particular view. And this one is just a bunch of logs. This is how they used to get timber off a mountain, because to build roads is very expensive. But also, this was quite wasteful, because logs would sink, they'd get jammed on the side. They wouldn't always make it down. But when he was watching it, he did have a good antecedent. His grandfather was doing this and his father, so he was trained in this. But as I said, he didn't have a classical education. So in fact, he was free. He was not hamstrung by conventional education. So his imagination or his creative abilities, he was free, kind of. So what they do, chuck the logs in, and you can see it looks like pick a stick, because they've probably got too many in there. And they all get blocked up, and you've got to get these guys with poles and release them, and they sink and all that sort of thing. And there's quite an interesting story in the book about a prince who'd lost all his money, the Prince something von Lippe, and lost all his money at the gambling tables. And interestingly, it was his wife, the feminine influence, who knew about Schauberger's work, and approached him and said, do you think your ideas work? And what she meant by his ideas, she'd already heard about his log flumes, or his ideas to do with log flumes. And can you do it? We've got a bunch of timber. It's way up in the mountains. It's too expensive to build a road. There are streams up there, but there's nothing big enough to float the logs down. Will your ideas work? And he said yes, obviously. But really, to nail it, he had to put some money in, so he put money in, quite a lot of his own. And it would be a success if they did 1,000 cubic feet of timber in a day, and they know it as a success. But it's well worth learning about this, because by now his head was above the profile, if you like, or above the parapet in relation to hydraulics, hydrodynamics, river management, and all this sort of thing, because about this time they talk about straightening out the Rhine and the Rhone and canalizing, put them in a straight line. And as we'll see, that's how you kill a river. That's how you kill the energy in a landscape, anything to do with that. Any straight lines will kill it. So when his surveyors were trying to find out where to put this, they said, well, where do we go? Where do we go? You haven't given us any plan. He said, follow the river as closely as you can, because that is showing you the shape that it needs to go. And you can see these wandering, winding canals, because to a 3D grockle scientist, you'd want to put it in a straight box, because that's all he knows. But what Schauberger was trying to do, I'll keep going all the time, is a particular spin, longitudinal spin, down this canal, down this log flume. And you can obviously see by the cross-section, you can see it on the shadow under this bridge here, roughly what the shape is. I mean, it's not an exact shape, but that is better there, because there's distortion due to the shadow as it's going in, falling into the bottom of the well, so, the log flume, because it's not that sharp. It's a bit blunter. And it is, in fact, the sharp end of an egg. So he was working with spin. He was spinning water. And I don't know if you've ever watched water going down a plug hole. You know roughly what shape it makes. Well, actually, it's this. This is the shape, that way up. So that's the shape water, like frozen in time, is making going down your plug hole. So what he wants to promote is that shape coming out of the picture, downhill, for the logs. So the way he did that, I'm going to talk a little bit about anomaly points in water. Does everybody know about anomaly points in water? Never heard of it? You know what an anomaly point is, like something that shouldn't be there. It really shouldn't do that. You look at something and think, no, that shouldn't do that, but it does. That's a bit surprising. And there's several anomaly points in water. The specific heat of water is the temperature of our bodies, because that's the temperature it takes most energy to heat the water up or cool it down, a very special point. That's why we function at this temperature. But as you go down in temperature, water is at its heaviest or densest at 4 degrees centigrade. So the denser the fluid is, the more tractive force it has. That means the more it can carry. So if it was a river, as you cool the water down, the more silt it can carry. So you only have to cool a river 1/10 of a degree, and it'll clean out its silt and dump it in the delta. If you warm water up, it gets sluggish like we do, and it'll drop all its sediment, and then you've got to dredge it. And it'll do that when you disturb its energy system. Anyway, which is putting it in a canal, straightening it, cutting down all the trees. If you keep the trees there, it'll stay cool. Its attractive force will stay intact, and also other subtle energies, which we'll come on to as we go. The best example I use to illustrate this on a really fast scale is watching the water that runs down your shower curtain or your shower screen. And if you think about it, if you remember it, or your bath, it never runs straight. Even the raindrops, they never run straight down. Why doesn't water just go bzzz? And it does this amazing dance. I mean, I looked at it for hours. You know, I was doing the shower now. I'm sort of fascinated. What is this stuff doing? You know, it's wiggling and winding down the screen. It's doing it in, you know, a matter of seconds and minutes. What a river does when it winds down its floodplain in thousands of years. It's the same shape. And if you preserve those shapes and that energy, then you preserve the landscape. And that's really what... Nature's been doing this for millions of years, so Schauberger's bywords were comprehend and copy nature. One of his favourite shapes, actually, is called the kudu horn. I mean, I looked at it for ages and I thought, it didn't make sense to me, because it's from an antelope in Africa. But you know, we were talking about the breaking shapes earlier. Well, this is an accelerating shape. I don't know why the kudu's got it on its head, but that's the shape. And I have made an obvious similarity between that as a fixed shape and a flowing river in the shape, because you can see to flow and take out erosion here, deposition here. So that bend is going to do two things. It's going to migrate that way and upstream, funny enough. If you have any obstruction like a sandbar, which we'll talk about in a minute, that will, over thousands of years, migrate upstream, which is kind of counterintuitive. It's almost amazing stuff, water. It's fascinating. Anyway, this is, I was talking earlier about his log flumes. I mean, this is some of the detail. That's the detail of his holding pond. And everybody said, it's too thin. As soon as the water comes down there, it'll just blow apart. So he stood there and shot off his shotgun, they released the water, and he came down here and they're saying, save yourself, jump, you're going to get washed away. But he already knew the shape of this holding pond being egg-shaped. That's the profile. That's the plan view. As soon as the water rushed in, goes to the other side, curls back on itself, self-stalls really, slows itself down. It's just an illustration of how clever he was. Leave it for a few days, a couple of days, and you get this stratification. These are thermoclines or thermal separation. You've got 11 degrees at the top, and anyway, it's colder at the bottom, a lot colder. This is tending towards 4 degrees as the ideal temperature. This is his log flume, and that's the section. And this is showing how the water is introduced to the log flume, a tangent to a circle. So he's really capitalizing on angular momentum to keep the spin going. And obviously he's taken it from the bottom. So this water coming from the bottom is dense at 4 degrees, so it has more tractive force. It's more buoyant. Stuff will float in there that wouldn't float in warm water. In fact, in the Second World War, the submarines used to know this about thermoclines and saline, different salinities, and they'd sit on the different density of water, they'd tune themselves, and they'd be underwater floating on a river of salt or a differential pressure and all this sort of thing. So I don't know if you know this, but it does separate. And we've got rivers in the ocean, the North Atlantic Drift and El Niño, all that. This is the flow of saline, non-saline, warm, cold waters. And in fact, if you look at it, the North Atlantic Drift really, most of the time, it's kind of flowing uphill. You know, there's lots of mountain ranges, but it still manages to flow uphill. And this is some of the magic effects of that Schauberger was attempting to explain. Anyway, so this is the basic outline of his flumes. And if you look down the flume, or even a river, in sectional view, again, you can see there's different, it's not much, I mean, there's not much temperature separation, but this is called an in-winding flow. This is cranking up in the middle. You've got cold water on a gradient. It's heavier than the rest. It's accelerating. And this is the shape it makes. Yeah? 5 minutes? Okay. So, if you promote this, actually, if you've got a sick river, you can actually rejuvenate it by using an egg shape. The inverse of that shape that I showed you earlier, from the water down the bath plug, if you're doing mathematically, is an egg. If you do conic sections, you get ellipses and circles, but with the hyperbolic, as that is called, where it flares, a section through there, you'll get the egg shape. And the egg, as we know, what it's used for in nature is to regenerate life. So some of these are some of the drawings these are Schauberger's notes. What we're looking at here is a rather special effect. This he called the energy cannon. And if it was in a river, this is where you'd get a ford. This is where it's dumping its silt. And you think, well, it's doing so well, it's wound down the river, and now it's just going to dump its silt. So what it does, actually, is the river winds up. It does so many windings in one direction with the spin in that direction, and then it does so many windings in the other direction with the spin in the opposite direction. So if it's going down the line that way, it's spinning anti-clockwise. If it's going down its riverbed, it's spinning clockwise as it's going round that bend. You can do it yourself. You can sort of get the hang of it. You know, I like to use my hands because I think, what's it mean? You know, what is this spin stuff? So I'm doing all that sort of thing. And even to get some of the shapes, you can do all kinds of... Some of these shapes, It's funny that because you live with them, they kind of evolve with you, and you're trying to do all kinds of things to see what he's talking about. It's a bit stale on a page. It's a bit stagnant. So one of the shapes, to look at the shape, is to imagine a plate is on your hand and keep the plate flat on your hand without it breaking. It's really good for the shoulders as well. And then do it with both hands. Then you've got the yin-yang movement, and you've got ebb and flow and all the rest of it. So the river would wind energy up, maybe 3 winds to the left and 3 winds to the right. You know, it's organic, so you're not going to see exactly, look down the river after what I've said, and I can't see 3 winds. So it would wind up, and then it would dump its energy, and the energy cannon, depending which way the river was flowing, north, south, east, or west, that is a very particular energy point, and it dumps its energy, just doosh, goes out into the landscape, re-energizes all the land. And that's, when he was building his machines later, he was engineering around this spot, really. That's the way I think about it. His repulsors, he didn't make machines, he worked for the Nazis when they annexed Austria, whatever year that was in the 30s. They just said to him, work for us or we're going to hang you. But he did have a 3-hour interview with Hitler, and when he came out of that, Hitler just said, give this man everything he needs to do whatever he needs, whatever the budget is. And they went off to develop all kinds of very interesting stuff. There's a bit of Tesla tech involved in all of that. It wasn't just down to Schauberger, but Schauberger was showing you could get things to fly, because there's a levitational force involved in this. We're all focused on gravity and going downhill. Well, there's always a reactionary force. There's a levitational force everywhere. And while I was studying this, as I said, some of it can be a bit academic, because when I read it, it was just for me. And it can get a bit dry, so I like to do anything I can to locate. You know, I didn't have a lab or anything. So I got a Coke bottle, Coca-Cola bottle. I tipped the Coke out, and I used it to clean an engine, I think, and then threw the rest away. But anyway, good stuff for that. And I found another one which fit inside it, so it was now telescopic, and I put a hole in the bottom. It took me ages to get the hole size right. And on the top had 5 points of injection. And I thought, oh, I'm going to do that. And I got a bunch of rubber hose from cars and from the windscreen wiper connectors, and connected it all up to a tap. And I let it go, and then I was watching it. I was happy out there day and night, you know, looking at this spinny stuff. And what they usually do with a hyperbolic when they're studying it is they put particles in. And you can see patterns in the particles. They sometimes use coffee grounds, which have been, you know, used, and then they put in the water, and you can see how they circulate. But I used ink. And when I was using ink, I saw a whole bunch of other stuff that you don't normally see, and it kind of blew my mind. And one of the things I did was, the way it flows in, you've got 5 points. I just used 5 points because it was a nice number, you know. It's, you know, I like 5. So it's going in anti-clockwise at the top. It whirls down, making that shape the other way up. And it falls out at one hole in the middle of the cap. So I don't know if you can get the shape, what it looks like. Runs in at the edge, tangential water injection flows out at a point, at a hole at the bottom. When you look at it from above, you've got a circle with a spot in the middle. I thought, wonder where I've seen that before. If you know your sacred geometry, it really kind of floated my boat, that did. Lots of things to do with it. Anyway, I put the ink in from the bottom, and it went upstream. And what you've got in some of the geometry, you've got the obvious shape of the surface of the water bending into this hyperbolic with a twist, but you also got what I call nested cylinders, which go up against the flow and then dissipate at the top in other geometry. So you've got anti-gravity. Well, if it's going against the flow, it must be. I'm interested in, it's not a good term, anti-gravity. I'm interested in things that float in more ways than one, not just on rivers or lighter than aircraft or Coanda effect planes. We should have been. I mean, these aeroplanes, well, we're nearly going off on one here, belong in a museum, because this technology we've had for 60 years, even 100, in this breathing of civilization. Keely was doing it 100 years ago. Anyway, this is just more to do with the rivers. Obviously, if you've got thermal differentiation, or you've got, so you've got different layers in the river, at different temperatures. You've got rivers within rivers. It's not just one amorphous mass. And that's a sort of acceleration curve. This is the fastest water. This is the slowest water. But always what water does is it breaks its own energy. If it didn't self-break with what we call turbulence, if it didn't do that, and it just ran straight off the mountain, there would be no mountains. It would only take 100 years, because if you double the velocity of water, you cube the amount of material it can shift. So that's why there was that big disaster down I forgot what it's called now. There was a town that was virtually washed away. Lynmouth, that's it. And basically you had rocks the size of a house. I mean, how does water do that? That's massive, massive power. And if water just did run off straight away like it did at Lynmouth, that's what you get. There'd be no mountains, they'd all gone. So what is it doing? Well, it's self-breaking its energy. So on these rivers within rivers, you get transverse vortices, and that slows it down. It also generates energy, it modifies temperature, it does a whole bunch of things. Water is so clever. I don't know who designed it, but they did a darn good job. Yeah. Well, there's loads more. Anyway, I'm doing a workshop later, but there are 4 books called the Eco-Technology series. And watch rivers. Watch the water that goes down your shower curtain. Thank you very much. Tesla is to electricity. And not a lot of people know about him, or this, you can call it technology, I suppose, but all of our technology that we have now is all on the hot end of a stick. There's always 2 ends to a stick, so we've been using the hot end to generate all our power. Yeah, internal combustion engines, external combustion engines, hot nuclear, everything is hot. And I kind of associate it with the Piscean masculine age. And we're going into the Aquarian age, which are these energies. It's called implosion because, well, I suppose in physics, it depends how you look at how things move. So the masculine energies move from the inside out, the axis to the radius. And those energies are what nature uses to take things apart. But the feminine energies are centripetal. They go from the outside in, so it's radial axial acceleration of fluids. It's about 10 years ago, I was working on the refurb of a nationwide house and down near Swindon. And we wanted to clean the building, so I did the fateful thing and put into Google water and cleaning. And one of the links, after I'd found what I wanted, was Victor Schauberger, and on it was this disc-shaped object, which is called a repulsion. And that was, but as I said, it was about 10 years ago. So I'm going to talk to you about particularly Victor Schauberger, and how he developed various kinds of technology. To my mind, Victor is to water what I'm going to use to slow things down. Now, all these other shapes are designed to do what? Make things go faster. Thank you very much. You're dead on. So we've got different shapes, or different designs on the same principle, but you're using a braking shape to accelerate a flow. So they're the wrong shapes. We're using the wrong shapes to do what we need to do, which is move a fluid. When you do use these shapes, I don't know if you know anything about propellers or impellers, but they get problems at the tips. They get cavitation and prop slip and all kinds of strange things happening on the edge of the blade. And basically, the engineers then they do all kinds of things to avoid that, like different shape. They get very clever. They're trying to engineer out a design fault, which they'll never do. So we know they're using the wrong shapes. They get quite clever. But you get a problem. One of the ways of looking at it. But on here, I'm using an illustration, which is, well, by the way, a lot of this information does come from a series of 4 books that were translated from German. Well, he was Austrian, called the Eco-Technology series, and they were translated by Callum Coates many years ago. There's a series of 4. But so this is a story that actually comes from Victor, because he talked about this. This, as you can see, is obviously a sycamore seed. All these other shapes are man-made interpretations of that same shape. And what this is designed to do when it falls off the tree is actually slow down, because it wants to break its fall, B-R-A-K-E, slow it down. That's what it's designed to do, that shape, is to slow things down. I'm really drumming this in so you can see where it's going in a minute. So you kind of get it, yeah, you got it, good. Right, so that's the shape. And also at the end of this, I think I mentioned that cavitation. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of cavitation. Yeah? Because it is a way to free energy eventually. Fleischmann and Pons were doing this in the late 90s with water, bombarding water. It was collapsing a bubble, making temperatures, they said, equivalent to the surface of the sun. And was it possible to sustain it? And then it was kind of all hidden. I mean, some of this talk, as I go along, I'll talk about what I think happened or is happening in regard of technology. Because when you give this talk, people say, well, where do we get one? Where do we get an implosion turbine? And there's none on the shelf anywhere, as far as I know. So we'll touch on that in a little while. But there's lots of diagrams. Victor was a great draftsman. It was absolutely phenomenal because, well,